Hello and welcome to the MMA Live Chat Show. I'm Rich Davie and it's Sunday, February 9th, 2014. On today's show, we'll be discussing MMA news, specifically Anthony Johnson re-signing with the UFC and Anderson Silva's target for an end-of-year return in 2014 to the Octagon. On today's show, we have yours truly and Wes Fiorentino. Thanks for taking part in another show, Wes. I appreciate you taking the time to be here and to discuss some MMA news with me. Go ahead and say hello to anybody that might be listening.
Pleasure's all mine, Rich. Thanks for having me. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, thanks for showing up, buddy. I appreciate it. Okay, I had to cover this topic since on that last show that we did with Chris Lieben, I threw in this topic in the final thoughts segment, actually, I think it was, where I just threw this in off the cuff there, where I was talking about Anthony Johnson probably re-signing with the UFC now that he's been doing so well over at WSOF, and apparently that did in fact happen. Any comments on that?
Well, I mean, it's not the biggest of surprises. The UFC has always been willing to give guys another chance in situations like these. Obviously, he's fighting as a light heavyweight now, so presumably the weight cutting issue, the making weight issue, will be a non-factor. And as I mentioned in an earlier segment we did on Thiago Silva's absence, now the light heavyweight division is going to need some fresh blood, right? And when he's on, Anthony Johnson is an exciting fighter, right? When you can tell that he hasn't killed himself to make the weight, when he's comfortable in there physically, he can really put a hurting on some guys, So this should be an exciting fight. Whether or not he can stop the takedown from Phil Davis is another issue, but because we know he's hardly the most savvy grappler.
Yeah, and Phil Davis was actually, at some point or another, before the shakeup happened in the light heavyweight division, he was actually supposed to get a fight with John Jones at one point, but he kept getting pushed to the back of the line for one reason or another.
Well, let's be honest, he's not exactly the most exciting fighter to watch. And I don't know, quite a couple years ago, there was quite a bit of hype around him. And, we saw a pretty lackluster performance against, he beat Little Nog, but, it was a pretty lackluster performance, not an exciting fight by any means. And there was the Prado debacle with the eye poke, although he did win the rematch. He beat Leo Machida. But, the fact that it wasn't like a, big news that he beat the former champ, I think kind of tells you how that fight played out.
Yeah, but with Johnson returning, that's what the point I was trying to drive home to you guys on that last show that we were speaking about with the Chris Lieben show when he retired. Everybody kept getting down on Johnson for missing weight, but again, as I was saying on the last show when we spoke about this is a guy that walks around at probably 220 to 235, and for him to be cutting down to 170, and then again he tried to go to 185, very difficult thing for him to do, apparently. And after he got cut, he went over to WSOF, and he fought at light heavyweight and heavyweight over there. So that's what I was saying. If he could make light heavyweight over there at the WSOF and consistently be on at 205 there, I thought we should cut him some slack and say that more than likely the UFC would resign him, because I think he won like 6 fights in a row over there, didn't he?
Yeah, he's put quite a run together. Whether or not that'll translate into consistent wins in the UFC's light heavyweight division, I think we'll see pretty quickly in watching how things turn out against Phil Davis. Yeah. It might not tell us whether he's going to make a title run, but I think it'll be a good test to see just what kind of level he's going to be competing at back in the UFC banner.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to have another heavy-handed light heavyweight fighter in the UFC. I like that idea.
Yeah, again, he does have his problems though on the ground, which I don't see him making a huge run at the title anytime soon. I wouldn't mind seeing him against maybe an Alexander Gustafsson at some point. That'd be an exciting fight to watch.
Have you heard any news on the contract that he signed?
No specifics, no. I would imagine it's probably not a long-term contract yet at this point. I haven't read that it's a one-fight deal or anything like that. But given his troubles to make weight in the past, obviously we've said that he's fighting at light heavyweight at this point, and that should mean that there probably won't be any problems with him making weight. I still wouldn't be surprised if Zuffa was, tentative at best in re-signing him, even with that stipulation.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't imagine that from the prior history they had with him over there that they would be real keen on signing for a long-term fight contract.
That just wouldn't make sense. And
I haven't heard anything either, but I would guess it's probably 2 or 3 fights that he's got a contract for.
yeah, but they can always extend that. If he goes out there and clowns Davis and just knocks him out, I wouldn't be surprised if they give him an extension or something like that. But again, I haven't read any specifics about the deal in the first place, so it's largely speculation at this point.
Yeah, like you said, kind of questionable what the wrestling capabilities of Davis as to what's going to happen, because being that he knows that's not Johnson's forte, that's probably how that fight is going to unfold more than likely.
Yeah, and what this also says is something about World Series of Fighting, right? Because in the past we've seen when big name fighters are in contractual talks with the UFC from other organizations, obviously Fedor would be the big example, but also guys like Eddie Alvarez. Alvarez came out a few years ago and said that the UFC they made him an offer and he found it insulting. But the fact of the matter is that if an organization like Bellator can afford to pay Alvarez more money than what the UFC will pay him, they're going to do that, and the UFC won't match that because they don't have to, right? I mean, Eddie Alvarez is a star in Bellator, but as far as we know, he's just another lightweight in the UFC, right? I mean, the UFC's got all the best fighters in the world at this point, except for maybe Alvarez and Michael Chandler in lightweight. So, and these are the guys that have made Bellator what it is to this point in time. So, like I said, if these other organizations can afford to pay these guys what they are really worth, they're going to do it because that's what they've made their bread and butter on. While the UFC, they don't have to do that. We're the UFC, right? We don't need to pay you what these guys are going to pay you. You're not worth to us what you are to those organizations.
Yeah, so I mean, they're star fighters that have the drawing power, much bigger names that have a larger fan base.
Exactly. So I think it's telling that Anthony Johnson actually did sign with the UFC. So that can mean one of two things. Well, maybe not only one of two things, but to me it seems like either the World Series of Fighting feels they could be going the route that the UFC has gone, whereas they're trying to build their brand, World Series of Fighting, rather than just trying to promote big shows with big names like Affliction did. Because look what happened to Affliction, They put on two massive cards and paid out all kinds of crazy cash to these big name fighters, and what happened? They collapsed utterly, right? And the UFC has built very slowly over the years, at least the early years, and the whole thing about the UFC is that the UFC brand is bigger than any one fighter. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They survived the loss of Chuck Liddell, and they're going to survive the loss of GSP now because that's not what the UFC is about.
Yeah, they don't build their brand around fighters. They build the brand around the brand.
Exactly. So right now we could be seeing the World Series of Fighting trying to go in that direction, right? Letting a guy like Anthony Johnson go to the UFC because they don't necessarily want to have to pay him the big money, or it could be a sign that they can't afford to pay him that big money, and they might already be in financial trouble.
Yeah, he actually made a comment before he was signed saying that he was going to go wherever the better money was. So obviously the UFC was offering the better money.
Well, yeah, I mean, and if the UFC is willing to pay him that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But the fact that the UFC, the fact that it actually went down that way, I think is telling because, a lot of times an organization like World Series of Fighting in the past, like I said, they're willing to pay guys the big money to keep them, the big name guys, or at least big name in the scope of their roster. But the fact that they didn't, I think, it can say either that they're trying to build slowly and not have to worry about the big name fighters, or that maybe they're already in some financial trouble and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's hard to say with what's going on over there because again, I love their production quality. I love the shows and events that they put on, but they just get zero support from Comcast, and they don't promote them at all. I mean, every time I hear there's an event on, I forget about it because there's no promotion going on anywhere.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of their events. I've been fortunate enough to remember to watch them. I saw Josh Berkman choke out John Fitch. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, he looks good over there, Berkman, huh? He looks, he's on a resurgence, man, coming around again, looking really sharp over there.
Of all people, right?
Yeah. And I hear that WSOF is going to be doing some co-promotion with, I can't remember what event it was that I heard. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't read that, but I'll be sure to keep my eye out for it.
Yeah.
Who'd you say it was?
I can't remember who
Co-promotion with who?
Yeah, I don't remember who the promotion is, but I heard they're going to do some co-promotion with another organization. I don't remember if it was kickboxing or something like that, or
Maybe Glory?
yeah, I'm not sure who
Golden
it
Glory?
was.
That wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
Although,
that would tend to go towards the direction that you're saying. Maybe they're struggling and having a bit of a time because, again, as I said, that they're getting no support from Comcast on the old Versus network, which is now NBC Sports Network. So
yeah, and co-promotion has not exactly worked well in the past for other organizations. I mean, the UFC has never done it, and they're never going to do it.
Yeah.
Because, again, they don't want to compromise the UFC brand.
Exactly.
And, I think of co-promotion, I think of, Elite Exceeding Strikeforce co-promoting, and look what happened there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that would be a wise move either, but, I'm glad that Anthony Johnson did, in fact, come over to the UFC. Kind of makes me look like I was the only genius on the show that day. Any other comments on that one?
What's that?
Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, you just better, now you say that, you better hope he doesn't get clowned.
No, I hope not. The only thing I could see is maybe he'll get smothered and laid and preyed on by Davis, but I don't think that's going to impact, his standing in the UFC as far as DFW goes, because DFW doesn't like those kind of fights anyway, and it wouldn't behoove Phil Davis, to take that route. So.
Yeah, and if Dana White thinks that he can still knock people out, even if he does lose to Phil Davis, he'll keep him on, especially at light heavyweight at this point.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be shocked.
The light heavyweight excitement of having somebody at light heavyweight that's going to be a knockout fighter is always welcome.
Yeah, but I mean, it wouldn't shock me if Phil Davis was able to submit him either. I mean, he's been susceptible to submissions throughout his career to much smaller guys. I mean, Rich Clemente tapped this guy.
Yeah.
Rich Clemente was basically a lightweight fighting at welterweight, and Anthony Johnson was basically a light heavyweight fighting at welterweight, and he got choked out.
Yeah. So he's got some head power.
Yeah.
But talking about Berkman earlier, I mean, he's got to be nearing the end of his contract over there as well. And I know that DFW likes him because he said, man, this guy is looking good. He's looking on fire. So that typically means that when you're at the end of your contract, we'll talk and you'll probably come over to the UFC. So
yeah.
They don't really want to lose Berkman. If they do, that's another big name fighter that they lose.
Yeah. It's hard to say what can happen. And, and if the UFC if they really want to sign Berkman, then World Series of Fighting is not going to be able to compete for that contract.
Right.
And it might not be in their best interest to try.
Yeah. Yeah, they might starve themselves to death if they keep on trying to buy fighters they can't really afford.
Exactly.
Okay,
and,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, like Josh Berkman, yeah, he looked great against John Fitch, but again, he's probably, if you're even going to go that route of trying to sign big name fighters and throw all the money to put on big fights, I don't know if Josh Berkman, even after the win over John Fitch, I don't know if he's the guy you're looking for.
Yeah. But DFW did love him. He made several comments about him. I know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so congrats to Anthony Johnson. Glad to see him back in the UFC. I hope he does well. Okay, next up, Anderson Silva's target for an end-of-year return to the Octagon in 2014. Man, I don't know about you, Wes, but I think that's a bit premature, and I think he's pushing his luck because when he comes back, man, people are going to target that leg, man.
I mean, what else would they do? I mean, you're fighting Anderson Silva. You should take everything you can get, right?
Yeah.
It seems almost unreal to me that he can recover that fast.
I mean, he was out of a cast within a month, wasn't he?
It was like a couple weeks. Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, for God's sake, I mean, how do you break your bone like that? And there had to be some sort of nerve damage or muscle damage because, the bone snapped. You could see it. His leg was flopping.
It was like completely folded over.
Yeah.
That was like one of the most gruesome injuries I've ever seen.
And I've seen a couple of conflicting stories where I heard one guy say there was an 1/8-inch rod, and then I hear another one was saying it was an 18-inch plate put in his leg. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I just find it hard to believe that with hardware in your leg like that, you're going to return. And again, if he's got to have the hardware taken out because you don't want to be fighting with the hardware in because if you do, and a break happens, it's going to make the situation even worse than it was before because the hardware isn't going to break. The bones are going to break where the screws are. So
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe that he's going to be able to make it back in that time frame because, again, as I said, usually, with people who can afford it, they have the hardware removed, and then, they got to go through the healing process again. So kind of hard to believe, man.
And it makes me a little worried, I mean, what if he does go out there and breaks his leg all over again?
Then he's done for.
I would think so. I mean, that leg's never. I mean, I find it hard to believe that leg's going to ever be the same after the first injury.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what kind of, medical regimen they have him on, but it just, seems like out of this world that he can be over an injury like that fast and back into action within a year.
Yeah, to be talking about your.
Well, if he's back by the end, if he's back by the end of the year, that's less than a year.
Yeah.
That seems insane to me.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I mean, because all the professionals that we're talking, I'm speaking about doctors and people, medical insiders and things like that, they were all saying that it's going to be 3 or 4 months before he can even get back up on his feet and training. And now here we are at the beginning of February.
Well, like a month and a half later or something like that?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, so apparently from what I'm hearing is now he's off the crutches and he's apparently walking stairs, and although he's lifting a bar with no weights on it, he's standing on his own 2 feet and doing that. But
yeah, but it's like 40 pounds. That's not nothing.
Yeah, but I still think that's foolish pride, man.
It seems that way to me, but maybe they know better than we do.
Yeah.
I hope they do for his sake.
Yeah, I just find it so hard to believe because again, there's no way the hardware is out already.
I mean, I hope for his sake that he's not letting himself, one, falling prey to his own ambition to get back, and two, allowing himself to be, with that in mind, being pushed, by possibly bad management to jump back into the game.
Yeah, and who would he fight when he comes back? He's going to have a fight or two before he gets back to a title shot. He's not deserving of a title shot, even though they still have him ranked #1 for some reason.
It seems, I don't know. I can't even. To me, it just blows my mind that Anderson Silva would be fighting not in a title fight. I mean, obviously he's had the fights at 205, but in middleweight, it like in my brain he's still like he's still the man. It's not like he lost. I mean, obviously he lost both fights, but there should be asterisks next to both of those fights as far as I'm concerned. Right? I mean,
as a true Anderson Silva fan.
Well, I'm not exactly a huge Anderson Silva, you know what I mean? But but don't you agree? Like, those are both like borderline fluke wins.
I don't know if I would call them fluke wins. I mean, he got what he deserved in the first fight for clowning.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. But it's not like it's not.
And that was a legitimate knockout. Not only did he didn't get a lucky punch in, he hit him several times, followed to the ground, and then finished him off after he was already out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But it's like, let's be honest. It's not like Weidman walked out there and mopped the floor with him for 3 rounds.
Well, no, in the first round though he dominated him even more so than he did, in the first fight.
Yeah, but we saw Chael Sonnen lay on him for an entire round in their rematch, and then he got completely destroyed in the second round. Obviously it's just speculation. We're probably never going to see it, but I'm just saying that and also I have in the back, as I'm saying this, I have in the back of my mind, Chris Weidman saying that he'd like to move up to 205 and fight John Jones when you haven't even you defended your title and you got a win like that. Like, dude, come on.
Yeah, I guess
get a couple real wins on your belt.
Yeah, I guess he's looking for that big payday now.
I mean, I don't blame him, but I mean, come on, man, you got to.
Well, really, what super fights do they have? They only really have one legitimate super fight that they can make, and it's already booked, isn't it?
Yeah, and super fights are bad for business. I feel like, especially when they're like 2 champions from different weight classes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look what happened with BJ Penn and GSP. I think that was if anyone, it just doesn't make sense to me to put your 2 champions from 2 different weight classes up in against each other like that.
Yeah.
Because then you have a champion. Yeah, he's going to go back to his weight class, but you have a champion who lost. Yeah,
and then the super fights, I don't particularly agree with them because you always got that controversy where you're talking about one guy that's a much larger man fighting a guy that's a smaller man, and then even if they come to the middle at a catch weight and meet, that's only going to be for weigh-ins and. Come the day of the fight, you're going to have the bigger man against the smaller man. And,
and I mean,
9 times out of 10, it's going to favor the larger man.
Definitely, because when your skill set is the same, right? That's why we have weight classes. The bigger guys is usually going to win if the skill set is the same, right? I mean, I mean, jiu-jitsu proved that the little guy can beat the big man, but that's with no weight classes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The reason that MMA had to have weight classes is because all of a sudden these bigger guys are learning jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
But I mean, you know, in my mind, it's just like, to me, for the pound-for-pound discussion, it's better if you don't have these super fights because, you know, sure, this lightweight champion moved up and fought the welterweight champion and lost. So yeah, he's still the lightweight champion, but everyone knows that, you know, technically he's not the greatest fighter in the world anymore, right? So as long as you don't put these fights on, there's always that, you know, idea in the back of your head, like, oh yeah, maybe he could beat maybe he could beat all these guys, right? And that's good for a champion's image, and it's good for the UFC's image to be able to promote champions like that.
Yeah, and even the pound-for-pound rankings are all in, you know, an uproar now since, you know, GSP and Anderson Silva are gone.
Yeah.
And I think even Weidman has moved into the pound-for-pound rankings at number 5 or something like that, hasn't he?
2 wins over Anderson Silva, you have to be considered top 5, I would think, at least.
But I think we got John Jones number 1 and Jose Aldo number 2, and a lot of people are questioning that.
I don't think so. I mean, Cain Velasquez should be up there.
Yeah.
But I mean, who else?
Well, I'm just saying number 2, Jose Aldo, because a lot of people are saying since he's come to the UFC, he's not really finishing fighters the way he was, you know, when he was in the
you know, it's about wins and losses. It's not about performance.
Yeah.
That's what technically, at the end of the day, that's what rankings should be about. They should be about what has actually happened.
Yeah, but GSP was ranked number 3 by a lot of people too, myself included in the pound-for-pound rankings, because, you know, he wasn't finishing fighters, whereas, you know, Jones was finishing fighters, and so was Anderson Silva. So
yeah, well, then you run into the problem of should Jones be the number 1 fighter in the world, considering that a lot of people think he lost to Alexander Gustafsson.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, it's
so it gets too murky. I think you need to stick to wins and losses at the end of the day, even if it's a controversial decision. Like at the end of the day, you have to stick with what's on paper.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so how do you feel about Anderson Silva still being ranked number 1 in the UFC rankings?
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd imagine that they just haven't gotten around to taking him off.
Yeah, I checked it. I checked it the other day when I was writing up the show, and I was like, number 1? How could he still be ranked number 1?
That doesn't make sense. I haven't been to their rankings in a while though. Like, do they rank the champion above the number 1?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess that kind of makes sense then. I mean, you know, he's still Anderson Silva, right? No one else has beaten him, so, you know, if he's not the champion anymore, then where else are you going to put him?
Yeah, I just have a feeling when he comes back, I don't think he's going to get a title shot right away. I mean, how can you do that? I think he's going to have to wind up fighting somebody else, maybe the number, you know, 2 or 3 guy, and more than likely he's going to lose that fight because there's no way he's going to return fighting at the same level he was when he was the champion. Because I don't care who you are, you're not going to fight coming back in 9 months or 10 months or 11 months, whatever it is, with an injury like that and be the same man.
Yeah, it just doesn't. I mean, at least in terms of talking about Anderson Silva, it's a pretty unprecedented situation. I mean, I don't know what to expect, really, to be honest. I don't expect that he'd be fighting. I mean, I don't think he'd be fighting for a title right off the bat. But again, we're talking about Anderson Silva, right? We're not talking about some random guy.
Yeah.
You know, the UFC. You know, if they feel they want to promote him, they'll do what they want. They don't care.
Yeah, but I find it hard to believe because, again, you know, round 1 in the first fight, round 1 in the second fight, he was totally dominated by Weidman, and that was a fully healthy. And in the second fight, it was the most serious Anderson Silva we have probably seen in years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's not going to be that same Anderson Silva when he comes back because, yeah, he might be more serious and dedicated and want to get the belt back, but, I mean, he's
ring rust is a real thing, man. Ring rust is a real thing, to say nothing of his leg injury.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wish him well anyway. I mean, he was one of my top 3 favorite fighters in the world, so.
Yeah, and I mean, he is still, I consider him the greatest fighter of all time.
Yeah.
You know, everybody loses eventually, but, you know, you got to look at what he's done over his career. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I would have to say him and GSP are my top 2 greatest fighters of all time. John Jones is moving up there.
I have no. John Jones might be the greatest, but when all's said and done, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
By the time he retires, who knows what he will have done.
Exactly. But, we got to see what's going on. But now he's also talking about wanting to move up in weight. You know, like you mentioned earlier, he wants to fight Cain Velasquez.
Yeah. Well, if you look at his frame, you know, he's still pretty young. If he starts putting a lot of muscle on, he could be a legitimate heavyweight. But
he's got chicken legs, though, for God's sake.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. He needs to put on some lower body muscle. But I think Cain. Regardless, I think Cain tosses him around like a rag doll.
Oh, I think so too. And look what Alexander Gustafsson did to him with the striking. Cain's level of striking is I think, light years ahead of what Gustafson could deliver, and we already saw what happened in that fight.
Yeah,
John Jones got
yeah,
the shit beat out of him in that fight.
yeah. John Jones is still, before before that, he still was not a great defensive boxer. You know, he likes to throw a lot of rangy strikes. He likes to throw elbows when he's inside. He likes to throw kicks. But when it comes to the sweet science, I think Kane tears him apart. I literally think Kane would lift him up over his head and just rip him in half.
Yeah, and again, the reason that John Jones was so good at doing what he was doing, as you described it, was because he was fighting men where he had a significant, reach advantage over them. But then when we saw what happened when he came up against somebody who was at the same reach and height as him, and he didn't fare so well, didn't look good at all.
Clash of the Titans, and yeah, it showed.
Yeah, so I agree with you, man. Kane destroys him in a heavyweight matchup.
I think that would be and I don't think the UFC would want to put that fight on because, at this point in time, that's arguably their two top fighters in the world, that they're promoting.
Yeah, and I don't think straight away he would go and get the title shot anyway like that at Cain Velasquez. They'd probably give him maybe another, like Anderson Silva when he moved up to light heavyweight, fought 3 light heavyweights, and so I think probably 1 or 2 fights at heavyweight for John Jones, maybe some lower end heavyweights that he could probably that would showcase his skill as a potential heavyweight fighter. Maybe that would happen before he fought Kane, but I don't think straight away he gets a fight with Kane.
I think, but even in that case, Rich, I think they would handle it the way they did with Anderson Silva. And Anderson Silva didn't fight, like he didn't fight the cream of the crop at light heavyweight either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
I mean, the best light heavyweight he fought was Forrest Griffin, who by the time he fought Forrest Griffin was not the Forrest Griffin that we remember.
No.
And I mean, arguably, Forrest Griffin was never the Forrest Griffin that people remember. Yeah.
But he did surprise me the way he dominated and handled James Irvin. I didn't expect that.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, well, we learned a lesson though. I mean, Anderson Silva took the mic after that and said, "If you want to fight me with Muay Thai style, this is what happens."
Yep.
But I don't think. But going back to John Jones, even if he does move up to heavyweight, they're not going to give him Junior Dos Santos because I think that fight goes very similarly. I think Junior Dos Santos would break his face open, break it wide open.
He's got to get a lower tier top 10 guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they're going to give him somebody out of the top 10 if he moves to heavyweight, because what would the point of that be?
Yeah, well, what's the point of having him fight? From the UFC's point of view, they have nothing to gain from a super fight with John Jones and Cain Velasquez, right?
Exactly.
The only thing that the UFC gets, I mean, other than the pay-per-view revenue,
yeah.
Long term, what they get is a champion with a mark on his record, right? I mean,
exactly. You're gonna have one champion who gets elevated to a higher level, more than likely the heavyweight champion. And then John Jones would be, damaged goods with a blemish on his record, and that would probably impact his standing in the pound-for-pound rankings too.
Yeah, and if John Jones does win, then you would imagine that he has to stay at heavyweight because you can't defend 2 belts at the same time.
No.
I mean, I guess you can theoretically, but I don't think the UFC wants to have to make that happen.
No, he already said that if he's going to go to heavyweight, he's going to stay at heavyweight because he said he's got to put too much weight onto his frame in order to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, imagine if one champ had 2 belts at the same time.
Yeah.
That's 2 belts that are locked up with one guy. So each belt you only get to see when that guy fights.
Yeah, and
right?
Initially I think John Jones said he wasn't going to be moving up to heavyweight until late 2014 or possibly mid-2015. So.
I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch with Gustafson, but other than that, I don't think he has too much else to prove at 205.
Yeah. Well, there's still a few guys that he hasn't fought at 205, right?
Well, there's a couple guys, but I mean, he's beaten most of the top guys.
Yeah, and
destroyed most of the top guys.
Yeah, isn't Machida promised a rematch with him?
No, he's at 185 now, Machida.
I thought I had heard somewhere that he was going to get another shot at Jones again, or he wanted another shot at Jones. But
well, that was definitely a big story because he was the quote unquote the guy who did the best against John Jones up until that point in time.
Yeah.
But
until he was dropped like a
literally dropped. Oh yeah, he beat Mark Munoz. That was a middleweight.
Right.
Savagely beat him on my birthday. That's funny.
All right. So, any other comments about Anderson Silva returning?
Just that, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing him return for the sake of his career, but I really don't want him to rush it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mistake. I think he's actually going to wind up losing when he returns, and I think what he's looking for is to go out with a win on his record, and I don't think it's going to pan out for him like that.
It depends on who they give him. I mean, I just can't imagine having Anderson Silva fight some scrub just to get a win. You know, that's just not how I see Anderson
Exactly,
Silva.
but with him ranked at #1, I mean, they're going to have to give him a top fiver when he comes back, no?
I guess so. Otherwise, it's a sham. But I mean, you know, look at a guy like Tito Ortiz. He fought the top guy. You know, say what you want about Tito Ortiz, but he fought top guys his whole career just because, you know, it's Tito Ortiz, and we don't think of Tito Ortiz as fighting scrubs.
Yeah.
But you know, this is a special case, I guess.
Yeah. It'll be
guess,
interesting. I still doubt it's going to happen at the end of this year. I would say maybe mid next year would be more.
That sounds more reasonable, but still rather soon.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's just a brutal injury.
Yeah, because again, you know, Corey Hill, 2 years for him to even get back into the octagon, and even he said that once he made it back, he just was not the same guy he was, you know, prior to the injury. So,
I mean, you know, I just feel like 9 times out of 10, maybe not that much, but you know, most of the time I feel like that's a career-ending injury.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but only time will tell, I guess.
Okay. All right, buddy. We've reached the end of the show. Any other thoughts before we say goodbye?
Just looking forward to the fights this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, we still have to do the prediction show for that one. I'm not quite sure if we're going to do one for that or not. We were talking earlier about that one, and was it 24 fighters on the card, and 20 of them were Brazilians?
Yeah, it's tough to call a fight like that when you haven't seen, you know, when it's hard to catch a lot of their fights.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we'll skip the prediction show for that one.
Save me the embarrassment of going 3-4 again.
All right.
Well, hey, I guess if
go ahead.
I'll talk to you off the air.
Okay. Yeah, it was good getting together with you again, buddy. I appreciate you showing up and doing those shows with me today. And it's time to say goodbye, so we'll say goodbye.
See you next time, everybody.
All right, man. Bye-bye.